Let's take a look at the new workflow between HDR Light Studio and Autodesk VRED. Okay, here we've got our scene ready to light. We've got all the materials assigned. And as you can see, as the camera moves, the reflections will move. So it's important to select the exact camera position that you want to light before you start lighting. So we've got camera 1 in this scene. You can download this scene and follow along if you want. And we've got camera 2. And then we've got this camera that's far away. By default, VRED will create an environment that is a dome. A dome will make it more difficult to control the lighting on the flattened bottom. So what we want to do is change this to a sphere. So if we go to the materials, we pick this default studio, and we change the environment geometry to sphere, we will now have accurate full 360 control over the lighting. If we scroll down to the bottom, ensure that the rotation settings are all set to 0, and we'll change this setting to 0 so that the map is centered on the sphere. Again, this will help with accurate light placement. If we come to the environment in the scene graph and we select the sphere, let's make this a bit bigger. So we're going to scale this to 10. The LightPaint calculations done inside of HDR Light Studio assume a sphere that's a long way away from the 3D model. So by scaling this up, it will make our light positioning more accurate. If you were to do light painting directly in VRED, you wouldn't need to do this. Okay, we'll turn off the shadow plane because we don't need that. And let's go to the shots that we want to light. Camera 1. Okay, so we're ready to start HDR Light Studio. Select the environment material, and let's go to the HDR Light Studio section. This is inbuilt inside of VRED. So before you start, you should have the main HDR Light Studio application installed and the new Streaming Viewport plugin added to VRED. Consult the installation instructions on how to do that. Okay, in the HDR Light Studio section, press the Edit and Load Settings button. This will start HDR Light Studio. Okay, here's the HDR Light Studio interface. If you are asked to update your interface layout, say yes, because that will then include the new render view where we are going to stream the viewport from VRED into HDR Light Studio. So if I press the play button, we can now see the viewport coming from VRED. I'm going to turn on ray tracing so we're lighting more accurately. Now, just a note, if you turn on anti-aliasing in VRED lower than 2026.2, there are issues with the HDRI map updating from HDR Light Studio. So I would leave that off if you're using below 2026.2. If you're using 2026.2 or above, like I am, we could turn on the anti-aliasing during the lighting process. I'm actually going to choose GPU ray tracing in VRED, which is very fast on my machine, and actually leaves more resources for HDR Light Studio. So if I return to HDR Light Studio, as we make changes, we get really fast updates. So we have our light list where all the lights are. We have a preset library where we can drag and drop. So if I want to, say, drag and drop this rig, I could just drop it onto the view and it will add all of those lights from the rig as a starting point. If I want to right-click, I can replace all the lights that we have with the lights from the rig. So I'll right-click, replace lights with rig. But we want to start lighting from scratch. So let's just edit, delete all. Okay, let's go to the Environment tab. And we'll choose the tag Interior. And we'll pick one of these interiors to just act as a background. I'll drag and drop that on there. And then if we go to the appearance, we could turn down the brightness, turn down the saturation. If we go to the settings, we can change the longitude and decide where we want that positioned. So we get some kind of effect that we like. Now, if you want to blur this to be just some ambient lighting, right-click, merge to composite. It's almost like grouping the light. And then come to the appearance and change the filter to diffusion. This now blurs that lighting. And then we just have a nice kind of ambient lighting effect to start with. Let's put a gray background behind the shot. So if we go to and look at all the lights, let's select, say, this light, light tent, flat side, and we'll change the LightPaint method to rim. This allows you to place lights in the HDRI map in the background. I drag and I drop that. That's now added behind the watch, and I could take down the brightness. So as you can see, by integrating this view and showing it inside HDR Light Studio, it allows you to drag and drop and interact with this view using the LightPaint methods. So I'll change that back to reflection. Now we can pick a nice scrim light, and I will drag that and drop that onto here. And as I let go, the light is positioned to reflect here, which is where I dropped it. Now, if you look at the Appearance tab for this scrim light and you see this view, I can move that scrim light closer to the panel, further away, and this all changes the appearance of the scrim light. I can drag it to one side, drag it to the other side. So it lets you craft the appearance of the light using this photographic studio lighting method. Okay, so let's just drag some more lights on here. I feel like I want quite a nice highlight on here. So I will drag this. The LightPaint method is reflection, so this will reflect and create a highlight on this strap. And I can reposition by clicking on the strap, and it will move the light on the HDRI map where I want it. That's nice. I'd like something on this side here, so let's drag another scrim light and maybe put it on this button here. And then we can drag in the scrim light view to move where the hotspot is around on that light. Okay. From this view, you can not just move lights, but you can do things like scale them. So if I press the R key, this will allow me to click and drag to make the light bigger, or click and drag to make the light smaller. You'll get better feedback, actually, if you do that on the canvas. So when the cursor is in the canvas, if I press R, that will change. We're just basically changing what these different modes are, but I'm using the keyboard shortcut. So if I use R, I can scale the light from this view. So actually putting the cursor in here, pressing W, this is now back into move mode. So as I click on the model, the light is moved to reflect where I am clicking. Let's just go back to VRED for a moment. With HDR Light Studio open and this light selected, I can light paint from the VRED viewport if I want to. So if I turn on in the HDR Light Studio section light paint, reflection painting or illumination painting or rim painting, I'll choose reflection, and then you have to press the shift key and then click on the model, and it will move the light just like it does in the HDR Light Studio interface. I'm just showing you that's what this setting means. Also, as you're lighting, if you did periodically want to save the lighting design in its current state, you can press Save Settings, and it will save the project data from HDR Light Studio into the VRED scene. This means if I quit HDR Light Studio now, and then I started it again later, it will reload the lighting project in that state. Anyway, we haven't finished lighting yet. Let's go back to HDR Light Studio. Okay, so you've learned about just the basics of manipulating the scrim light in this view. Just to let you know also, the keyboard shortcuts are the same for every different window. So if I'm in this view, W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. If I go down here, it's the same. I can change what the tool is by using the keyboard shortcuts. And this is how I do it. So I'm going to leave this one for scaling. I'm going to leave this one, W, for moving the lights. Now in this view here, the same applies. So by default, you can move the scrim light position around. And you can move, but we could change it to scale, and then I can scale that. So we can use the keyboard shortcuts to quickly manipulate what this light looks like and where the hotspot is. Okay, so let's just move that light again to here. And we can duplicate that light. And maybe put one up here as well. Okay, so let's assume that we're totally happy with this lighting on the HDRI map. How do we finish this process and go back to VRED? So what we do is, whilst we've been lighting, this has just been a low resolution map. Now this is embedded in your VRED scene, so you could end up using a very low resolution map without knowing it. I'll just show you how low resolution it is. So I'll make a light, I'll make it very small, and I'll use the rim light mode to click. And you can see if I put that light on an angle, you can see how pixelated that low resolution map is that we use during the live process of lighting. Now, the reason it's low resolution is to keep everything fast. If we started sending high-res HDRI maps to VRED, every time a lighting change was made, this would slow everything down. So this just keeps everything nice and fast during the lighting design process. Now we've finished the lighting design, I'll delete the light because I don't want that one. We'll press the HDR button here, and this lets us render out the final HDRI map. So the settings are going to orient this map for VRED, which is already set here. The resolution of this map, let's say we'll make it 5,000 pixels, and then we need to give it a name. So if I just browse to the desktop and call it Demo 1, save. So now if I press render, HDR Light Studio will generate a high resolution version of this map. Okay, so now the map has been saved. We can just move HDR Light Studio out of the way. If we scroll up and we change the material to a different material and come back, you'll see that the environment is actually using the file on disk. It's no longer using that live environment file. And if we now come to the HDR Light Studio section, we can quit HDR Light Studio, save current HDR Light Studio project. Yes, let's save that. That will mean that that state of the project in HDR Light Studio will be embedded in the VRED project. So now we're left with a scene that is lit using this HDRI map that we designed. Okay, let's say we want to make some changes to that lighting we've just designed. What do? We press Edit and Load Settings. This will restart HDR Light Studio and it will load the embedded project. So if we come to HDR Light Studio, you'll see that the lighting you created, or all the lights, are restored. If we press play, we stream the viewport again, and we can make any changes we want to that lighting. And then the important thing is, at the end of the editing process, we must generate the HDR again. Press render. This will leave the scene, the VRED scene, using a map on disk that's high quality. We don't want to leave it with the low quality live map. Okay, that's finished rendering. So we'll move HDR Light Studio, we'll quit. We'll press save to store the project. And then we can see if VRED is using that file on disk. So that shows you the new workflow between HDR Light Studio and Autodesk VRED. Adding the streaming viewport has dramatically simplified the process. You could concentrate on lighting in one interface, drag and drop lights, and take advantage of all the LightPaint features to reposition lights or to change the mode for scaling, rotating, all in the HDR Light Studio interface. So download the file that's included and have fun and enjoy trying out and using HDR Light Studio. Thank you for watching.